Thank you, Robin.
I was thinking about my history with storytelling with data. When I used to work for a computer company called Digital Equipment Corporation, um, I had a master's degree in computer hardware, and I was working for this company, and they tasked me to compare and contrast their microprocessor with the competitor's microprocessor and present this comparison at a computer conference. And I worked on it for weeks. And this was before Toastmasters. Certainly, I wish I'd had what we're going to talk about tonight under my belt, because if I had had that background in storytelling with data, there might have been fewer snores in the audience. When I moved out here to the Northwest, my wife and I moved out here to the Northwest so she could study to be a naturopathic physician. And she became a physician in 1996. And like all physicians, she has continuing education credits she has to earn every year. And the easiest way to do that is to go to a medical conference. So we went to a medical conference, and I went along as, the token husband. And she was in conference one day, and I was bored and I didn't know what to do. So I wandered down to the conference area, and they weren't really paying attention to whether or not you were wearing a conference badge or not. So I wandered in. I said, I'm going to go check out some of these speakers. I mean, these guys are professionals. These guys are doctors. They're presenting, important medical stuff. I want to go in and see what these guys are like. So I went in and I sat down. Of course, I was in Toastmasters by now, and I'm really curious. Oh, I'm going to see the professionals, see how these guys do it. The first guy stands up there. He's got an hour to prepare. He's going to talk, he's got data on the stuff they've been studying. And he says, okay, let's look at the data. He hits his button. The PowerPoint comes up. It's a 20-foot by 14-foot screen. PowerPoint comes up with little tiny cells on the screen. I mean, 20-foot by 40-foot screen, and you having a hard time reading the numbers. And he's going to start going through it cell by cell. It was a coma-inducing presentation. I saw how the professionals are doing it, and they're not doing very well. And we're going to try to do better. We're going to try to avoid death by PowerPoint or death by data, and we're going to try to embrace storytelling with data. Now, let's go over a couple of roles. I'm going to ask somebody who doesn't currently have a role, who is a Toastmaster, if you'd be willing to evaluate one of our speakers, because we lost an evaluator. So let's introduce our other roles first. Angela Ritchie is our timer. Angela, all three speakers that we have tonight are 12 to 14 minutes. All the evaluations are 3 to 4 minutes. Would you just show us quickly the green, yellow, and red?
Certainly, I'll be using the standard Toastmasters timing flags. So it's green, yellow, and red.
Okay. And speakers, I would suggest you move Angela up to a corner of your screen so you can always find her. Let's see. Sandra Kolb is our grammarificator, and which hopefully has a word for the day for us. Sandra, do you have a word for the day?
I do, Mr. Toastmaster. The word of the day is a synonym for data. The word is evidence. Evidence means the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true or valid. Some examples in a sentence are: obtaining the hard and fast evidence is not always a simple chore. The evidence was found through scientific research studies. And the third sentence, he has been unable to find evidence to support his theory of how galaxies are formed. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you, Sandra. We're going to skip the Wizard of Oz tonight, but I would like to know if I have a volunteer to evaluate. Michael Davison. Now, Michael, that means you have 3 roles tonight: closing the meeting, table topics, and evaluating. Are you up for that? Unmute.
I think so. If I can figure out how to work my microphone, I will do it this evening.
Okay,
Yes,
so
thank you
you,
very much.
Michael, you are evaluating our first
Mhm.
speaker.
I will be ready.
Our first
I-
speaker. First
Our
speaker.
first speaker,
Yeah, our
indeed.
first, yeah. Okay. So let's move into the speaking portion of tonight's meeting. Tonight's speaker actually kind of kicked off this meeting because she and I were talking and she was telling me how interested she was in this idea of storytelling with data. And I'd heard that phrase before, but I wasn't a member of Nerdmasters when I heard it. It was years ago. And she said that and I went, and my little nerd detector went, wing, you know, whoa, that's a great topic for Nerdmasters. And I brought it back to the club officers and they went, ooh, yeah, we got to do that. So we invited Leah, as the person who kind of kicked off this process, to be one of our speakers. Now, several years ago, Leah Erb pivoted from managing large databases to learning how to extract insights from data itself. That's how Leah first heard the term storytelling with data. She was enthralled. Leah was stunned to learn there really is a way to discuss data discoveries without causing the listener's eyes to glaze over. Tonight, she is thrilled to experiment with us. Well, not with us, on us. She's going to experiment on us. She's going to experiment on her fellow nerds and Toastmasters, bringing us storytelling strategy for presenting data visuals in a speech. Telling us about avoiding death by data, please help me welcome Leah Erb.
Thank you, Grand Nerdmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and especially all the honored guests. Have you ever been to a talk when a data graph is thrown up on the screen full of important looking information? Maybe it was a little intimidating, or in the very least, distracting. I think we've all been there. For the audience, even a beautifully designed data visual can be overwhelming at first, even a simple chart. People still need a moment to figure out what's going on. What are the parts of that graph? What is it trying to say? And where the heck is the legend? The sudden appearance of a data visual during a speech will divert people away from what the speaker is saying. Now, what can you as a speaker do to avoid distracting your audience when you display a data graph? You could pause for a minute. Give your audience a chance to soak it all in. For the right audience and the right visual, that's a perfectly valid strategy. Another idea is to introduce your graph in layers, much like the old-fashioned transparencies, if you remember those. One laid on top of another until your visual is fully developed. Let me demonstrate what I mean by layering. The 10 students in Mrs. Carter's 4th grade class took a survey to find out how many of their homes had which kinds of pets. This is what they discovered. 4 had cats. 6 had, started on the wrong slide. Thank you. 4 had cats. 6 had dogs. 3 had fish. 9 had hamsters. This is a simple example of layering your data. By unveiling evidence a piece at a time, you are being kind to your audience. You are absolving them from having to work too hard to absorb the information you are sharing with them. The pet example is a very good start also to storytelling with data. In a nutshell, storytelling with data is presenting data with narrative. As far as stories are concerned, the pet example was a pretty sparse story. The story failed to explain the final data results. A little backstory would have helped explain the significance of the high number of hamsters. Unfortunately, the audience may be left with questions or worse, assumptions. Are the hamsters really the most popular pet in town, beating out both cats and dogs? Or did little Joey's hamster recently have babies and Joey's mom ended up giving hamsters to each of his 10 classmates, except Susie because she's allergic? Providing interesting bits of information and context to the story makes your visual more meaningful, effective, and memorable. We're Toastmasters. We've witnessed the power of a good story. You may have even studied storytelling techniques to improve your own speeches, right? The good news is, if you're unfamiliar with telling stories with data, you can use any classic storytelling technique when you're developing your data story. For example, there's a classic storytelling technique called the 3 C's. The 3 C's stands for conflict, character, and climax. Identifying the 3 C's in your story will give you structure to your storyline. Tonight, I'm going to walk through the steps for taking a data chart apart and weaving it back together into a storyline. All right, as a side note, to all you bullet point presenters out there, and I know you're there, all the concepts and strategies I am talking about tonight are applicable to you too. Throw a slide up on the screen full of bullet points, your audience will get distracted. All right, let's look at our 3 C's one at a time. First one, conflict. Using emotion, as you may know, is a great way to draw your audience into your story. Introducing conflict is a sure way to evoke some emotion. How do you find conflict in a data chart, especially if the data you are presenting is, I don't know, dry, not particularly controversial? One way to find the conflict is to step back and consider, why am I showing this chart in this speech to this particular audience? Am I using it to prove a point, maybe to inspire them to a particular action? For example, and I'm going to use this example for the rest of my talk. Let's say you did data analysis on the attendance trends in your club, your Toastmasters club. You discover that more than 98% of your members have come to every meeting over the past year, which happens to have been the pandemic year. This attendance rate is much higher than recent years. With further investigation, you've become convinced that the high rate is due to meetings being on Zoom. You want your club to go hybrid, even after members start coming together again in person. You want to make meetings accessible. So you draw the initial draft of your graph with all your data points using your favorite tool, and you give it a nice little title. You call it Our Club's Attendance Over Time. Oops. The graph plots your data. However, it's not particularly strong on emotion. There's a surprising drop in the line, and that's curious, but it doesn't really evoke any feeling of conflict. Now think back to the true purpose of presenting this chart to this audience in this speech. The purpose is more than just the data plotted on the graph. The purpose is to convince your club members that they want to go hybrid. With the purpose in mind, now what is the conflict of your data story? It's tempting to jump right into, we need to go hybrid. However, looking back at your 3 C's, you realize that that's more of the climax or even the conclusion to your entire speech. The conflict in your data story is the problem you're trying to solve. And if you dramatize it a little bit for effect, that all the better, as long as you know your audience reacts well to a little drama. So how about, will our club survive the post-COVID era? Or is our club dying? What better conflict is there than survival, right? All right. Okay, now we have some ideas of what conflict we might want to arise in our audience. So let's go with the next C, and that is characters, character development. Wait, character development in a data chart? Really? Yeah, sure. Data charts are basically made of entities, right? You are showing how something changes over time or how something measures up against something else. A pie chart is made up of proportions of some things. Each bar in a bar graph measures something. All these somethings, they're characters. They're characters that play a role in your conflict. What are some practical steps for introducing your somethings, your characters? Think along the lines of once upon a time. Once upon a time, you set a stage upon which you can introduce your characters. Put your completed data chart aside for a minute and just draw the axes of your graph without any data plotted yet. If you have an XY axis, you draw one or both. If you have a map graph, draw the outlines of the map. You get the idea. By setting the stage first without the data, you give your audience a chance to understand the context of your story, making it easier to introduce your characters on the stage. Okay, but again, what are the characters? Well, as soon as you start plotting something on your graph, you've got your first character. Consider that character and think about its backstory. That's a good place to start in your story, adding a little interest right off the bat. With our hybrid meeting goal example, the first dot is the attendance percentage on the first year of the club. You could take a moment to talk about how enthusiastic the first members were when they created a brand new club, resulting in a high attendance rate. And as you develop your storyline, you literally draw to the next relevant point on your graph, or you highlight the next relevant bar or geographical area, and you explain the significance while you're pointing that one out. All right, on to the third C, the third and final C, climax. At some point, you're going to reach the point that makes your point. This is the third C in your storytelling strategy. The climax is the light bulb moment you want to provide your audience. This is the reason you're telling your story. Let's get to the story example. But as a side note first, a couple of notes about this story. All the data is made up. And with data stories, it's often maybe just a small portion of a larger speech. For this example story, imagine I already talked about the importance of members attending meetings and made an argument for measuring strength of a club by the attendance rate averages. All right. Therefore, in no uncertain terms, we need to consider, is our club dying? In order to find an answer to this question, let's see how our club looked when we considered ourselves strong and how that compares to now. 10 years ago, our club started and everybody was in the year 2011, and everybody was excited about building this club culture. So everybody came to every meeting. The attendance remained high for 5 years. Past surveys suggested that members felt good about the club. They were strong. And it was good for 5 years until 2017. All of a sudden, attendance plummeted 20 points. Records from that time made it clear the drop was primarily due to horrible weather. Many meetings, people just couldn't get to the meeting, making it inaccessible for them to join. Following the bad weather year, attendance did not quite bounce back as we'd hoped. We lost some of our mojo until the year 2020. When most members came to every meeting. This was largely due to the pandemic, paradoxically forcing us to use Zoom. Members could attend from wherever they were. After observing the low rate during the bad weather and the high rate during Zoom, I hypothesized that the accessibility of the meetings played a major role in its strength. I surveyed members and got some statistics from Toastmasters International, and I was able to make statistical predictions. With the hybrid format, we will not only get some of our mojo back because we got a new format, but we will also be accessible and lots of people can come to our meetings all the time. I propose we open talks about going hybrid. As a Toastmaster, We are free to cruise through multiple slides when we're presenting our data. Use that freedom to your advantage. Combine the layering technique with any tried and true storytelling strategy. The 3 C's that I used tonight was just one strategy of many. The combination is sure to draw your audience into your story and give them a chance to absorb one idea at a time. The overriding principle when you display data charts in a speech is this: don't make your audience work too hard to figure out what is the point you're trying to make. Don't let your data die on the screen. Breathe life into it with storytelling. Mr. Grandmaster.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask you, the audience, to take a moment, go down to the chat, and if you haven't already, go down to the chat and send a note to Leah, letting her know what you thought of that particular talk, letting her know what she did well, if you have any suggestions for improvement, and I'm going to shut up for 30 seconds while you do that. Now, I want to make sure each of our evaluators knows who they're evaluating. Michael, you are evaluating Leah. Carolyn Curley is evaluating Eric Muelling, and Joyce Vick is evaluating Brandy. Everybody, all the evaluators, great? Okay, and you'll have 3 to 4 minutes. Now, one of the things that Leah mentioned was, she just mentioned in passing statistics, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but 67% of statistics are made up by the speaker at the spur of the moment with no data behind it whatsoever. And of those statistics that are made up, 25.285% of the speakers add decimal places to the right of the decimal point because they think it makes their statistics more credible. Isn't that amazing? Now, moving on to our second speaker tonight. Data-driven visual communication can be extremely useful in teaching science. Highly interactive and visual compelling lessons engage students and improve their understanding and their recall. Our second speaker, Eric Muelling, is a multimedia developer. He worked in science lessons, promoting learning and understanding. Today, Eric will show examples of his science lessons and explain the decisions made during the development process. His lessons will illustrate how Toastmasters can improve their visual communication. Telling us about data-driven science lessons, please help me welcome Eric Muelling.
Thank you, Grand Inquisitor. I have a trilogy. I love science, I love learning, and I love teaching. And I was extremely fortunate to have rolled all 3 of these loves into a career in science education. During the last decade before retirement, I worked at the Geophysical Institute at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. The Geophysical Institute is a world-renowned center for the study of geophysical processes, atmospheric processes, and space physics. Now, what does that mean? Well, the center is also simply known as the GI, and specifically scientists at the GI conduct research into the northern lights, snow, ice, permafrost, seismology, volcanology, tectonics, and sedimentation. With grants from the U.S. National Science Foundation, I worked with scientists and educators in a special unit called K-12 Outreach. Science education was my sandbox, and I loved every minute of it. My eyes were open to the potential of multimedia education after earning a graduate degree in visual communication. Many of you have heard, I'm sure, that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I want to assure you that multimedia is worth 10,000 words. I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I'm going to have to indulge you a little bit because half my slides are part of a PowerPoint and half are files that I just have to show that are Flash. It's not going to be as seamless as I would prefer, but let's go. First, I would like to define multimedia. If photography is one medium, then multimedia is the integration of several mediums, including photography and video and audio, frame-by-frame animation, dynamically generated data, and interactivity. That's multimedia. Now, multimedia is fast and effective, and it's a way of communicating complex concepts. Multimedia helps listeners visualize, synthesize, and analyze difficult subjects. I'm going to show you some examples of data-driven interactive media. So this is kind of a classic waveform, static content, old school way of showing what a waveform is. And basically what you learned in school was on ink on paper, and it was static, and that was the best they knew how to do at the time. Let's see if I can show you another way of showing waveforms. So I'm hoping that most of your screen is an animation, and that animation has has a waveform. Now, not like ink on paper, but this waveform, I can, with a slider, adjust the wave velocity. Okay, I've got a problem because I've got sliders on the screen, and when I select the slider, my selected area of zoom is moving. So I'm going to have to can this method of sharing the screen and start over. Hi, everybody. I'm back. I'm going to not share a portion of the screen, go back to basic screen sharing, share my desktop, and I hope that you see an animation now.
We do.
Okay. And with this animation, I can grab a slider and go left and right and change the velocity of the wave, change the amplitude of the wave, and change the wavelength of the wave. And what we've discovered in K-12 education is that when students interact with the information, that they get it. And this is an example of a waveform anatomy. But there's more. Waveforms can interact with each other. And so this is an example of data-driven information. In the background, I wrote a little program that is charting two graphs. The top row and the middle row are graphs, and I can control the frequency of those two graphs. Let's make the top row kind of a fast frequency graph, and let's slow down the frequency in the middle one. And the bottom row is how those two waves are added together. That's the interference of the two waves. When students get to interact with information, they start to really get it. And more examples of data-driven information. Here is a wave, and let's reduce the dampening here. I'm going to reduce the dampening, and now the student is going to interact with this wave by grabbing it and creating a wave. Well, what fun is that? But there's more, because let's go ahead and dampen this wave and get narrow it out and start again. But I can start a wave. It's going to reflect on off the right side. start one wave and then create another smaller wave and watch the two waves interact. That's education. Another example of how we were teaching wave theory is this one, and this is the electromagnetic spectrum, which we all know is a wave, and the waves are longer down near the radio portion and very high frequency waves near the gamma ray portion. Finally, not finally, there's more. We were teaching how particle waves work within columns of water. And specifically, these are wind waves, and wind waves are actually circles when it comes to particle theory. And so in the center of the screen right now, you see the little red dot following a circle. And in fact, every dot on the screen is drawing tiny little circles and creating a big wave. Now, those are wind waves, but when it comes to tsunami waves are more of the shape of an oval. And so now if you look at the center of the screen, you can see the red dot is following an oval, just like every dot on the screen is following an oval. This is data-driven information. One more I just kind of like to point out, this one's fun. Well, I think they're all fun, but this one is especially fun because the sun is spinning and sunspots are spewing out plasma. And because the sun is spinning, if you were to track the plasma through space, it would look like a spiral. But in fact, every particle of plasma is traveling in a straight line away from the sun. And so the lines that radiate from the sun in the middle, if you pick a dot, you see that the dot follows the line and is not actually moving in a spiral. What fun is that? Let's move on to more graphics, and we're going to talk about how to teach not dice probabilities, plate tectonics. So I came across this graph on the internet, and I thought to myself, what are these red dots anyway? And then I came across this graphic, and it is a cacophony of color. It has a legend in the lower left-hand side, and one of my pet peeves with legends is that they make your eye work like a ping pong ball. You look at the data, you go down to the legend, and you see what red means, and you go back to the data, then you go back to the legend, and you look what orange means, and your eye's just kind of working like a ping pong ball. And one of our design considerations has always been put the data on the graphic and don't use legends. Avoid using legends whenever possible. So with that in mind, interactive tsunami map. Sure. Okay, so this is a data-driven tsunami map. We were able to get latitude, longitude, and tsunami information worldwide. It was created, as some of you geeks probably would have guessed already, as an XML file. It's sort of a database file. And the projection is the map projection is called a Mercator projection. That is, a Mercator projection makes the latitude and longitude lines on the map equal distance, which makes it extremely easy to plot dots on the map. And so the student gets to interact with this map, one, by selecting how far back they want to go for data, how far forward they want to go for data, whether or not to show the earthquakes, whether or not to show tsunamis caused by volcanoes, landslides, fault lines, and finally, a pie chart that indicates that of all tsunamis, most are caused by earthquakes, 1% by volcanoes, and 7% by landslides. Let's go back and now talk about another way of presenting data. Again, this is old school. This is ink on paper, somebody's drawn 3 graphs, and they're trying to explain what the probabilities are when you roll dice. This graphic artist couldn't get over using all the colors on the palette. And and by the way, with everything that we produced, we ran it through a colorblind software to make sure that it was legible and readable for everybody, regardless of their eye capability. And so this was somebody else. They're using liters and lines and in percentages in text, and it's maybe better. This one, I think, is probably the most graphically interesting because they've shown that there are more combinations of dice that will add up to 7 than there are that will add up to 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. It is probably the best graphically if you're doing ink on paper and you're not doing multimedia. But here's how we solved teaching dice with multimedia. I'm going to hit the start button, and we are rolling the dice hundreds of times a second. Every time the dice are rolled, we're graphing the dice. And what is going to happen is, of course, 7 almost always shows up as the most rolled combination of 2 dice. Doesn't always, it's probabilities, but I think that students really enjoyed the interactivity of working with this data. I think they finally got the idea of what it's like to roll dice. Plate tectonics. Ring of Fire. It's an interesting graphic. I think I don't understand their choice of font. I don't understand their choice of color. Here's somebody else's, truly a cacophony of color. They're using vector arrows to indicate the direction and intensity of the motion of the plates. It's informative, I think, but certainly more informative than this one. And I kind of like that they used a satellite image of the Earth here, but it doesn't actually answer the question, how do plates move? So let's see what we can do with multimedia, and let's see if we can explain that a little bit better. Oh, we did tsunami map, didn't I?
Yep.
Okay. Earthquakes. So we wanted the students to be able to interact with some real data. We had data for communities lat long, earthquakes, rapture zones, and the student gets to select the Richter scale. Let's go back to, let's pick all earthquakes. For all the records that we have, earthquakes 5 or better and up to 10, and hit go. And what we're seeing is these earthquakes being displayed geographically located on the map. The size, the intensity of the earthquake is indicated not only with the size of the dot, but the color of the dot. So we've got geolocation with the dot, we've got size indicating magnitude. And if the student rolls their mouse over any one of these dots, then they get a readout in the upper left-hand corner. In other words, they get to drill down into this information, which again is working with data. This will let me show a bar chart. So now we're looking at the number of earthquakes by year. We can hide the earthquakes, hide the bar chart, hide and show the communities, hide and show what's called a rapture zone, and hide and show the latitude and longitude. The interface was hotly debated on all these multimedia projects, but showing and hiding an eye generally was agreed that was a pretty good way of saying yes and no, or go and no go. We used green generally to say yes and correct, yellow for caution, and red, you're wrong, when it came to creating interactive quizzes. But we're just presenting data, and I'm going to run it one more time and point out that a common term that people use is aftershocks, after an earthquake, and the scientists prefer the word swarm. And so if you look in the lower left-hand corner, occasionally you see 5 or 6 earthquakes form almost at exactly the same time. That's a swarm. And then keep watching the map, and you'll see, rarely you'll just see one earthquake. You'll often see one and then a whole bunch around it, and that's a swarm. And that's exactly the kind of information, that's exactly the kind of learning that we want students to take away from. And since I'm sharing my screen, I don't know where I'm at with the time. I think I'm probably over time. I'd like to share one more, which is one of my favorites. And let's see if I can find it very quickly. Decisions. Earth weather words. Getting students to interact on the screen. I mean, when I walked into a classroom and saw the students leaning into their computers, I knew that we had them. This is a word scrambler. Let's pick English, for example, and the word that, and we say go and pick English, and this word is probably a weather word, cirrus, C-I-R-R-U-S. Great job. This is probably rain. Yes, it is. This next one is sleet. I know because I've played it before. So I'm randomly selecting words that we pre-picked, randomly ordering the letters within the words, and then letting the student figure out what the weather words are in English. But of course, we could play in you pick. Anybody want to take a guess? The way I just want to conclude this is things to keep in mind. Legends separate the reader from the data, causing the eye to act like ping pong. Vector arrows can indicate direction and speed, but with animation, you don't need vector arrows. Just make things move. Pick a color palette, restrict yourself to the number of colors. There's nothing more legible than black on white when it comes to readability. Actually, readability is your choice of words and the grade level of the words. Legibility is whether or not your student can pick out the letters on the screen. Check your stuff for color blindness. Be careful with your font size and only pick 1 or 2 fonts for cleanliness. And with that, I hope you learned a little bit about taking data to 3D to animation.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you very much. Take 30 seconds and send a chat to Eric about what he did well, or a suggestion for how we could do even better. Thank you very much, Eric. And unfortunately, I am all out of statistical humor. So you guys can consider yourself fortunate. Okay, we are a little behind, so I'm going to push on. I'm going to push forward. We have a third speaker, another guest speaker tonight. 2 of our speakers are guest speakers, and we really appreciate them coming to help us out. Our third speaker tonight is Brandy Era Miller, and she has been a member of Meridian Toastmasters since 2015. She works as a research scientist at the Washington State Department of Ecology, studying toxins in our environment. Just in case you aren't up on your common toxins, PCBs are a group of chemicals that negatively affect the health of fish-eating animals, like humans and orca. Tonight, Brandy will tell us a story about how scientists are testing the slime on rocks for PCBs and using the data to track down the sources of these chemicals in local rivers. She'll discuss with us the process she used to develop her talk, telling us just a little about environmental forensics, using environmental data to find sources of harmful chemicals in our rivers. Please help me welcome Brandy Era Miller.
Now, of course, I had this all working great before the talk.
That's always the case.
Oh, wait, I don't want to cancel. Well, why it's starting partway through the presentation? That's really strange.
Can you go up to the first slide and then hit start?
I'm just gonna go ahead and go up to the, yeah, that's a good way to do it. So what I would like to do, I felt like it would be easier for me to go ahead and give the presentation about the work that I did using the biofilms and talk about how we found the PCBs using the biofilms in the Spokane River. And then when I'm done, I'll talk a little bit about how I put the talk together. I felt like that was the easiest way to do it. All right, can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. As Kyle mentions, I'm a researcher at the Washington State Department of Ecology, and I study toxics in the environment. And Kyle mentioned PCBs, and I'll talk a bit more about PCBs with this talk. The first thing that I like to think about when I'm presenting environmental data to folks is, why do we care about toxic chemicals? And we all have our reasons. And for me, it's that I care about human health. I care about animals in the environment. And you'll see in this slide, in the top picture, this was from J35 Telequa, who has since had a healthy baby orca. But you might remember a couple of years ago, she was the one who had a stillborn, or a baby that died, and she pushed it around in the Salish Sea for 2 weeks and mourned the loss of her baby. And that really affected me. It affected a lot of people that I know. And one of the leading causes potentially of her baby's death was the buildup of chemicals such as PCBs and other types of bioaccumulative chemicals in her body, which may have been passed to her baby through breast milk. And then that's why I have a picture of a baby, because I have a 7-year-old daughter and I breastfed my daughter, and I had to think about, I'm passing on chemicals to my baby, but of course I decided for me personally that it made more sense to give her the benefits of breastfeeding. But these are all the things that, for my mind as a scientist, make this work so important. So I talked a bit about bioaccumulation, and in this slide, what I'm showing you is a food chain of how these chemicals get into our bodies and get into the bodies of orcas. And they start in the environment, in stormwater, and in releases from factories, or basically urban areas and industrial areas. They make it into our waterways. That gets into the phytoplankton, the small critters that are in our waterways. Those get eaten by zooplankton and crustaceans and macroinvertebrates. Those get eaten by small fish, and then the big fish eats the smaller fish, and then the bigger fish eats the big fish. And eventually you make your way up to orcas, who are at the top of the food chain in the Salish Sea. I also have here just an arrow kind of where we fit into this food chain. And we eat salmon and we eat a lot of fish. And that's one of the primary ways that people are exposed to these harmful chemicals. So some of the suspected causes of, when we talk about harm, what type of harm are we talking about? Generally, I tend to think of cancer. And in young children, I think of things like autism, certain types of autoimmune disorders. But PCBs and other types of harmful chemicals have really been linked to almost any kind of harmful disease you can think of. And the research is plentiful. So I've mentioned PCBs, Kyle mentioned PCBs. So I want to give you a little bit of background into this particular chemical. It's called a polychlorinated biphenol. And so in this picture, you can see the structure. The two rings are called biphenols, but they're benzene rings. And then they are bonded together in the center. And then they have places all around them that can be attached with a chlorine. There are other chemicals in the environment too that can be attached. There can be a bromine, there can be a chlorine, there can be a fluorine. Some people have heard of the PFAS chemicals. They're not specifically this structure, but it's a fluorine chemical that attaches. So it's a lot of these chlorine, bromine, fluorines attached to an organic element that can create these types of chemicals. Specifically, PCBs, they were banned in the 1970s, and so they're persistent. And you've probably heard the term forever chemicals, and that's often used to describe the PFAS family of chemicals. But in this case, PCBs are also a forever chemical. So the example that I'm going to use is in the Spokane River, and this particular map is called a heat map. And where you have a more red color, that shows where you have a higher concentration of PCBs, and where the colors are cool or very light, you have lower concentrations of PCBs. Now, the Spokane River has some of the highest concentrations of PCBs in fish that we have monitored statewide. So we know that there is a problem in the Spokane River with PCBs. So there are many matrices that you can analyze in a river. And in this case, we tried rock slime, which we called biofilm. And we used that to see where the PCBs were in the water column. You can use water samples, you can use sediments, you can look at fish tissue itself, but the problem with fish is that they move around. The nice thing about rock slime is that it pretty much stays put, and it accumulates a little bit higher concentration than what you're seeing in the water column. And it's a pretty good window of about 2 to 3 weeks of what's been happening in the water column. So we decided to use biofilm in this case. One thing that you'll notice with our heat map here is I have an area circled, that's our background sites. Now these sites were served as reference points for this project. So you can see there that our concentrations of PCBs are fairly low in our reference sites. And then as you move further downstream into the heart of downtown Spokane, into the historic industrial area, you'll see is where we have some of our highest concentrations in this heat map. And I call this sort of our first line of evidence in terms of environmental forensics. So going out with this data, we were able to see, okay, these are our areas where we have high concentrations, but what else can we find as we look closer and closer at this PCB data? So the second line of evidence is sort of parsing apart these PCB chemicals and sort of looking at them in terms of their patterns, or what we call their fingerprints. So this slide, I'm going to be with you here for a few minutes to explain this slide. This is a little bit data heavy, but what I'm showing here is that PCBs exist as 209 potential individual chemicals. Remember those, that the screen that I showed you with the 2 benzene rings? What happens there is chlorines can be attached anywhere on the outsides of those benzene rings. And there's 209 potential individual structures that can exist. So with this graph, you'll see each peak that is shown is either one of those individual chemicals, or where a couple of those chemicals were together. They couldn't be differentiated in the analysis. It's a couple different chemicals, but potentially there's up to 209 of them. So that's a lot of information to look at when you're looking at these fingerprints and PCBs. So then what we do is we break up the 209 chemicals into what we call homologs. They're basically 10 chemical groups. And you'll see along the bottom of the slide, moving from left to right, we have mono, di, tri, tetra, and so on. And what that means is if you have a mono biphenol, you only have one chlorine atom attached to it. And with a di, you've got two. With a tri, you have three chlorines attached to the biphenyl rings, moving all the way down to the deca, which is only one because it's a completely saturated set of rings. So this helps us look at our data in a much more manageable way by moving our 209 chemicals or congeners into these bins or homolog groups. And this is sort of the second line of evidence in terms of fingerprinting our data. So this slide shows the same data for all of the locations that we analyzed biofilms. But what it does is it shows not the concentrations, it just shows the patterns, the fingerprinting patterns, the homolog patterns. And what you will notice is that there are some changes that occur. And can folks see my arrow on the screen?
I can.
Okay, great. That's one thing I didn't test out before the presentation. So one thing I'll point out here is you'll notice that this particular pattern is very different from the rest. And this also happened to be the location where, I'm gonna go back with that, the location where we had our highest concentration of PCBs. And so this was very curious to us. Okay, we have a higher concentration. We also have a very different pattern occurring from the next location upstream, right here, which was MIB. One thing that we did is we looked at these different chemical mixtures of PCBs called aerochlors. PCBs were sold as aerochlor mixtures. It was like kind of the commercial name. Now, if you were to put aerochlor 1260 right next to this particular location, you'll see something very interesting, and that the pattern of aerochlor 1260 looks very similar to that of this location. And since we've discovered this, we have gone on to do more investigations, and we think that there might be a transformer somewhere in the riverbank, somewhere underneath some of the historical buildings, potentially leaching PCBs into the river. And so this particular case was pretty straightforward. There's a lot of other interesting things that we were able to find in the river. You'll see here that this particular MBU location was very different from the background sites. It had much more of the octa and the nana, the heavier chlorinated homologs. And then as you move to this location, which was PF, is where there was a known groundwater plume of PCBs that was coming into the river. And that particular plume had a signature that looked very much like this, a lot of the tetra, which is the yellow. So right here, we were able to show the effects of the groundwater plume coming into the river. And so again, it wasn't just the concentrations, but it was also this fingerprinting work that really led us to be able to say, we've got 2 lines of evidence now. We know that we potentially have these sources in the river. And so the conclusions of this study is that environmental data can tell us a lot if we use our investigative skills and kind of put on our investigative hats and research into what we're seeing. And some chemical data, in the case here of the PCBs, have fingerprints that we can follow. So that is the end of the presentation. It went very fast. So I'll just share a few points about how I put this presentation together, and then maybe folks could ask a couple of questions So I have given many talks about PCBs and many talks about the work that we're doing on biofilm. And each time I do it, I have to think about who my audience is. What do they need to know at the particular level that they're at? Is my audience a group of scientists? Is my audience Toastmasters, who are a mix of folks from the world who all have different backgrounds? So I probably want to be fairly general in my talk. One thing I also have learned over the years is to be very try to catch your audience right away. So in this case, I try to get right out there with that slide that says, this is why this is important, and really sort of like get to people's heart and minds and sort of capture them in that way. Then using a visual like this one that really shows you what bioaccumulation looks like and what the food chain looks like, helps people kind of understand how we get from something in the water to something that's in our bodies. And I also tried to be not too data heavy with my slides, but I had a really hard time trying to simplify and sort of break down this discussion of PCB congeners and PCB homologs. And that's, I think, maybe where I went a little too heavy in some of the science. But I do think it's pretty interesting to see. And then animations are always really great. So with this slide, I had the animation of the aerochlor coming in right next to the particular site where we had potentially a lot of that particular aerochlor in the sample. And yeah, just trying to keep the slide simple with the exception of some of these little more data heavy slides. And even this slide, I try to keep fairly simple with trying to explain what PCBs are. So that's how I developed this talk. I sort of threw it together a little more quickly than I would have wanted to, but I've got a lot going on and I still wanted to be able to give this talk. So with that, I will turn it back to folks if they have questions. If there's time, it looks like I'm on red.
Thank you, Brenda. Brandy, thank you, Brandy. Does anybody have a question they want to ask Brandy?
I would like to know how long has the study been going on?
Oh, okay. Yeah, we started doing the biofilm work in 2018, and we have two years of data, 2018 and 2019.
Any other questions? Michael.
I was looking at the one slide that she suggested was kind of data heavy, that had the bar graphs on it there and the groupings done by that. And I was wondering if some color shading to help us see the alignment of those 10 groups would help some of that illustration there, help kind of visually group those, because I found that the legends down at the bottom were a little bit hard to visually align with the bars that were above.
I completely agree with you. And I even thought of that when I was putting this together today. If I had time, I would have tried to like have the blue appear and just show you where the mono and the di, sort of how they connect to the different groups. Is that kind of what you mean?
Right, exactly. Kind of to help kind of group those bars together a little bit visually.
Yes. Yep. Very good suggestion. I would have done that.
I thought it was good information though. Yeah.
Yeah.
But as you say, it's kind of dense, so it might help us with the density. That was my only suggestion.
Yeah, no, that's a good suggestion. Thank you.
I'm going to unmute myself. I am going to cut off questions right now because we've been going for an hour and 9 minutes. We are going to take a short 4-minute break. So be back at 8:43. go take your much needed bio break and we'll be back. We may have to cut out or drastically reduce table topics because we are behind schedule.
I'm not complaining too much though, because this is some amazing content. I love this, what you guys are putting here together.
It's great content, and
Exactly what we're looking for.
Yep.
Yes.
Absolutely. Very engaging.
As someone who does digital media, this is phenomenal information, and the way you're conveying that data is just mwah.
Yeah, brilliant. Love it. Nerdiness. I love it.
You want to wave?
I can see some assimilation could happen.
Yeah. This is why I didn't have time to fix that other graph. very well.
Oh, that makes sense. Oh.
All right.
I'm sure she could have helped with the coloring, there a little bit.
Yeah. Could you have helped with that, honey?
I'm going to grab myself a glass of water. I'll be right back.
Cool. Cal, you got a haircut. So I came in late, Zana. Where did you hear about Nerdmasters, and how'd you end up here?
I think it was on Facebook, but I'm not sure. I just got this invitation that came up and I was like, well, that looks interesting. And I clicked on it and signed up.
Awesome.
I don't remember where it was from. I was just like,
I'm glad the marketing was working then. So what do you think so far?
Oh, I'm liking it.
Awesome,
Yeah.
fantastic.
I like data, lots of data.
Oh, there you go.
But it was funny when I saw the topic, I was like, now, is this a play on words? And are they talking about actual data, or do they mean like data on Star Trek? I didn't know.
Yes. We made a few jokes about that in some of
That's
the
funny.
promotion too.
I was going to say that came up in our planning meeting. She
Yes,
could be
it
one of
did.
us.
Yes. And then there was a meme about data. It was in the comments on Facebook too, because you weren't the only one to make that come up with that thought. It sounds like you are the person who needs to join our club.
There you are. Zeta, are you a Toastmaster already?
I am in galvanizers. It's just 1 hour, so it's really hard to do a lot in 1 hour because
Sure.
it's in the middle of the day
Gotcha.
for work. So
And you might just not have a nerdy audience there,
oh, we only have, well, they're half nerdy. It's a half
Okay.
nerdy audience.
Nerd links.
We can provide a nerdy audience for you, you see.
They don't get my they get the computer nerdy stuff, but they
Mhm.
don't get my Lord of the Rings references and Star Trek references and stuff like that. They're just
Right.
Yeah.
Well, see, she's a perfect one to be assimilated.
Totally.
Yes.
I thought it was like you're
Yeah.
describing us here, Zana. I mean, this is.
I was going to say,
This is
I
where a
almost
lot of
get the
stuff-
force pulling on her there.
Because I mean, when we started this club, we were
Beam her up.
our point was basically just to help the club figure out contests online. But then we had so much fun talking about all the other nerdy stuff that because you just put all on nerds in a room together. What's going to happen?
Yeah, it's gonna happen.
And so we just had
Yeah,
so much fun. We had to make a club out of it. So that's where here we are.
Whenever I'm around people who are nerds and stuff like that, I always have a way to prove how nerdy I am, because they'll be like, oh, I'm the biggest Star Trek fan. I'm like, no, you're not. Oh yeah, I am. How many conventions have you been to? And they just shut up. They're just like,
We all take a
0.
vow in this club to not start poking at
Yes. Yeah,
Because they don't share our
there's
nerd.
some of us here who have
Right.
some crazy nerd credit. It's kind of hilarious.
Right, exactly.
Like
They don't
Eric
get
was
what
in his
nerd
speech
credit
talking
is.
about building a computer from scratch in this last meeting.
Oh, cool.
when he was
That's
12.
awesome. Of course. Can't
But he's
do it
not that much
Okay.
of a nerd.
I am
And I was-
calling this meeting back to order. I apologize for shutting down the lovely nerdly conversation, but I am calling this meeting back to order.
Chaos, no order.
Thank you, O Lord of Darkness. Uh, We have two tiny tech moments, and we're going to do both tiny tech moments in a row. And if we have time when they're done, we'll see if we can squeeze some table topics in. So our first tiny tech moment, and by the way, for our guests, this is a Nerdmaster tradition. There's so many things we share with each other. We started these tiny tech moments so we can share the app we found, the technique we learned, the thing we do to be effective. Our first tiny tech moment is brought to us by Sherry Simmons, who is a DTM and a member of 5 clubs, but she definitely considers herself a nerdling. Sherry used to think that the metric system was confusing. An episode with her cat prompted Sherry to develop an easy fix for converting metrics. Please help me welcome Sherry Simmons and her tiny tech moment, Convert Me.
Thank you very much, Kyle. So, especially after Brandy's scientific speech, I know that this is really geared to my fellow nerdlings. A while back, I took my cat to the vet, and the technician said he weighed 2.8 kilograms. I laughed and said, like I know how much that is. I thought she would tell me how much that was in pounds, but instead, the young technician said, oh, just multiply by 2.2 and walked away. Now, it's not that easy to multiply two numbers with decimals in your head, but you can round and get a pretty good idea and evidence. Are you familiar enough with the metric system to easily make conversions? When I went to school, we weren't taught metrics. Then years later, they told us the US would eventually be converting everything to metric, but that didn't happen. So what does happen is you travel or you read an article that talks about liters or kilometers or Celsius, and you really would like to know how much that is. So my goal is just to give you some quick tips on conversions. I'm going to share my screen just to help you. Back to my cat's weight. A kilogram is a little more than 2 pounds. In this case, you round the 2.8 kilograms up to 3 and multiply by 2 to get 6 pounds. I figured out later that it comes to 6.16 or 6 pounds 2 ounces, but 6 pounds is close enough for my purposes. One common saying is a pint's a pound the world around, but that's not exactly true. Next, let's talk about temperature. If you're doing any traveling to a foreign country, you'll want to know the Celsius temperatures in Fahrenheit. So here's your quick hint on how to convert temperatures. Multiply Celsius by 2 and add 30. If you hear that the temperature is 32 degrees Celsius, you might think you need a coat, but that's actually about 94 degrees using our calculations. The exact temperature would be 89.6, so keep in mind that there is a wider range the farther you get from 15 degrees Celsius. In this example, 20 times 2 is 40 and add 30 is 70. It's actually 68, but close enough for us. Then there's liters. If you're going to be driving in a foreign country, you want to be able to get gasoline or petrol as it's usually called. First of all, you'll need to convert liters to gallons. Just remember there are approximately 4 liters per gallon. If you're getting 60 liters, divide that by 4, and you'll be getting 15 gallons. Be prepared to be shocked at the price. Gasoline is extremely expensive in Europe. Right now, it's about $7.44 a gallon. So again, liters divided by 4 equals gallons. Of course, if you're driving, you'll also need to know how far it is to the next town. A kilometer is a little more than half a mile. The easiest way to figure mileage is to take the kilometers, divide them by 2, and add 10% to the original number. 100 kilometers is 60 miles. Or, as I show on the screen, 60 kilometers divided by 2 plus 10% is approximately 36 miles. So just a quick recap, and don't worry about it. I'll be putting a little cheat sheet in the chat. Kilograms multiplied by 2 equals pounds. A little more, 2.2 be exact, but close enough to round. A liter divided by 4 equals gallons. Celsius times 2 plus 30 equals Fahrenheit. And kilometers divided by 2 and add 10% to the original number equals miles. 1 kilometer is a little more than a half a mile, or 100 kilometers is 60 miles. Finally, keep a quick conversion table handy, or better yet, memorize it. And the next time you travel to a foreign country, you'll know if you need your fur coat or your bathing suit, and you won't run out of petrol. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you very much. And I can see that people were really enjoying your Tiny Tech moment in the chat. So thank you. That's useful. And do click on her link when she posts it. Moving on to the next Tiny Tech moment. Robin Lee is a health and longevity coach who likes to deliver content in fun ways. In today's second Tiny Tech moment, she's giving us a demonstration using Doodly video software. If you've been on the Facebook or internet, you've seen some of these Doodly things. The goal of the video Robin is working on is to inspire lifestyle changes that can increase length and quality of our life. So please help me welcome Robin Lee. Robin, you're muted. Robin, you're muted. There
All
you
right,
go.
thank you. So I've been putting together this video. It's in progress, and I wanted to be able to show you particularly a few things here. First, I'm going to give you a little bit of an orientation here. There are scenes, so you could quickly just drop and drag one of these over here. I'm not going to do that because it's going to ask me if I want to replace my existing stuff. Here are different kinds of people, and so if I want to drop some kids into my scene here, then I can do that. And then down here, so here's the text that you can add, just drop and drag again your text in. This is my timeline down here. And I can click through, I can move anything around, just dropping and dragging it. I'm going to go ahead and play this, and then I'm going to show you a few things that I'm going to change. Oh, so up here, this is where how you can preview what you've got. And so far, I have not put any sound on. In the lower left is where you can either record a soundtrack or you can drop in some music with this music tab here. So my goal is to show with our average lifespan that people are not particularly healthy. By 55 years of age, at least 70% of the people have at least one or more chronic conditions. Now, one of the things when you're wanting to make it fun to learn, I have found that this is a really fun way to get engagement of people of all ages. And one of the things that I'm going to do in my longevity membership is to be able to have it cross-generational. And I got this Doodly software because I figured it would be easy to be able to teach people of all different age ranges how to be able to make lifestyle changes in a good way. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that. One of the things, so this blue bar will down at the bottom will take me back to the beginning, and I can put my, so when I choose this, one of the things that I wanted to do, I'm going to go ahead and delete these kids for right now. I decided I wanted to, right now, the exploring longevity draws first, and then longevity comes up second. And so to be able to have longevity, the symbol draw first, then you just move your layers and change the order. And that will also change which one is on top in your thing. And then, not that one.
And the duration is how long it takes to draw that object, right?
Right. And then you can, so you might have noticed most of them will draw along the lines. And then this one, it was just kind of drawing like this because I imported this person so that I could get somebody in the age range that I wanted. So if you want to actually do a custom, see, this is previewing how it'll show up when it's drawn. And so to be able to do a custom path, you can go in here, make it larger so it's easier to see, and increase your path size. And then when you start, you're telling it the order that you want to draw. And then you can see how it's previewing up in the corner, how she's gonna show up. And then you can move these little, you can move these blue points around to be able to get your path exactly how you want it.
Robin, how long did it, one of the questions in the chat is, how long did it take you to put together the doodly you just showed us?
I've been working on it off and on today. And then one of the challenging parts, there's some things that I have not, I'm not going to save this one. Actually, I think I can save that. So far it's because I didn't draw it all. It will only, when I, like if I preview this part, it's only going to draw the part where I put the lines.
Right.
Oh, actually, so that what it wound up doing is it drew it and then everything else just appeared. But I kind of thought that if you didn't draw a part, then that part would actually not show up. So I'm not sure about that.
Okay. We're going to have to move on.
Okay. Anyway,
you,
that's
Robin.
a little bit about Doodly and how to have fun giving your.
One more
data.
question is,
Yes.
how much did the tool cost?
It was like a $97 special and then an upgrade to do the color options.
Okay. So I've seen people do advertisements with that where they draw out everything they need using that tool. So well done.
And I will find there's a fabulous sacred geometry doodly that I will put in the chat. It's about 2 hours long, but I watched it 4 times.
Okay. We are going to skip our Toastmasters tonight. I'm Toastmasters. Our table topics are topics of the round table. We're going to skip that tonight because we're just don't have enough time. And I'm going to move on to our Grand Inquisitor. The Grand Inquisitor, or in more plebeian terms, the General Evaluator, is here to mirror back to us our meeting as a whole, helping us ensure we have succeeded in our meeting's narrative goals. Now, James, I got to ask you, did you get the words right for this last sentence? Because you said, please help me welcome the pendant of pendants, as opposed to the pundit of pundits. James
It's
O'Farrill.
supposed to be pedant of pedants, but yes.
Okay, well, you did do it right, because you are trying to be pedantic.
Yes.
Please help me welcome James.
Thank you so much. All right. Before I jump into my inquisition, I want to first introduce our first evaluator of the evening, which I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, that would be
Michael
Michael,
Davison.
because he's evaluating Leah, who was the first speaker. So take it away, Michael.
Thank you very much, James. And just for clarification, is it 3 to 4 minutes on the evaluation or 2 to 3?
3 to 4.
3 to 4.
3 to 4. Thank
We
you.
are an
very
advanced
much.
club with
Appreciate
advanced
that.
evaluations.
Oh, indeed we do. And we're going to try to do one right now. Thank you so much. Hey, you know, if I hadn't volunteered to do this evaluation this evening, I probably wouldn't have been on at all. So thank you so much for coming and inviting us. And Leah, thank you so much for presenting to us this evening. Thank you, fellow Toastmasters, for the opportunity to give her some feedback on this. Leah, I thought it was a fantastic presentation. It was well worked out. I thought it was a nice talk. Your choice of subject was wonderful. It was something I loved. One of your examples. It's something we can all relate to about as we think about club growth and things like this, how we can make meaningful information visual and visible so that people can understand what's going on and help us to kind of spot trends, help us to spot causes and effects. Those were all fantastic things. So I thought you made a great choice for your audience. You talked about presentations with data and you gave us live examples. It's one thing to talk about things, but it's another thing to go ahead and show us things. And you did that. You talked about presentations and your presentation was a presentation. Fantastic. You also talked about terms that we can follow along with. For example, the 3 C's you gave us, the conflict, the character, and the climax, I believe. You did that very well. It was easy for us to follow. You had them right there on the screen where we could see at what point you were at, and you sort of centered your presentation around that. Nice organizational tool. I happen to be one of those bullet point lovers, so I was kind of wondering a little bit about where you were going with that in this particular case, but I actually liked your bullet point list points that you made during your presentation, and it was nicely done. You really did kind of just give us a very terse core message, and then you used your presentation to fill in the detail. Very good technique. Also, I loved your talk about treating data as characters. I've never really thought about that too much with character development like you would in a story. That was fantastic too. So I thought you did a great job in all of those areas. You used some presentation techniques in creating your presentation, and I thought the only thing that I might really recommend or found detracting at all is that your presentations were bright and lively, but you yourself are a little bit in the dark where you're at over there. So I was looking kind of back and forth at the bright presentation and then kind of seeing you there. One of the things I think you might want to think about a little bit is your lighting, so that you are lit up as well as your presentations are during that particular time, or perhaps using a more muted color background or a more neutral thing for your presentations. Although I thought your presentations were wonderful. Great examples. Another thing is that you had some great gestures that you used during your presentation, but a lot of them were lost off the edge of the frame. I couldn't see all of them in your gestures. And then you also were out sometimes motioning out here too. It's a good idea to kind of get that sense of where your boundaries are in your Zoom presentation, which will help us see all that effort that you're putting into those wonderful gestures that you gave to us during your presentation. So I would have loved to have seen all of those presentations that were done at that particular time. You did so many other wonderful things though during your presentation. You're a master presenter. You used vocal variety, good volume and pace and gestures is what we could see of them. I thought they were very good. So I think that a couple of things that you might challenge yourself to do, try using the presentation background mode in Zoom during this point. I thought with your terse non-bullet points. It would have made a really nice background that you could have pointed to back there. I'm trying to look for my open screen area there. And I think that that would have worked out really well for your type of presentation. So we could have seen you, but we could have also seen the bullet points as well. And then I think that the other thing that you might want to think about is how you are working in terms of your closeness or your proximity to your camera during that particular time. That may control the area that is visible to us. So very much, I looked around, people were engaged during the whole thing. The content was extremely relevant. Your core of the 3 C's were wonderful. And I think the rest of the audience, like myself, probably can't wait to go and apply some of the things that we learned. So thank you very much, Leah. And back to you, Mr. General Evaluator. I totally lost my talent there. Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was awesome. Fantastic. And thank you again, Leah, for your tremendous presentation. And next up, I believe we have Carolyn, who will be evaluating Eric. Please welcome Carolyn.
Eric, data-driven science lessons. I loved how you brought all of your experience into this speech. You began with your credentials in the introduction of you as a speaker. I thought that really set the initial stage for where you were bringing this information from. You had so much to share, but what really came through was that animating the data and making it interactive really brings it so that people understand the science. You shared that excitement when you said, I saw the students leaning into their computers with your body language. You not only leaned in, you smiled. You showed that this brought you joy. I could tell that the animations really did bring you joy. You enjoyed showing this. I would say letting us really know what the goal of this speech is. You had so many different types of data to share that maybe just one slide of the static type of data, bringing in that description of the multimedia because you did a wonderful definition of it. I would just say, look at the screen instead of reading that definition. But then sticking with that multimedia presentation. There were so many differences that you really had us enthralled. I watched the people in the audience and they were leaning in. They wanted more. That was well done. One thing that could have helped your speech would have been organization. There are a lot of, well, let me show you this, or I'm going to show you, or you had a couple sides. This was an exciting presentation with the information you love. Keeping that energy level up, you can modulate it a bit, but having that joy maintained will help with your vocal variety. That was very evident at the end when you read. The way I just want to conclude, legends, vector arrows, color palette, that list brought your energy down. You had mentioned before that you were worried about your vocal variety at the end. Yes, it dropped because you were reading a list. Instead of reading a list, what are the things that you want us to take away? You brought in a number of ideas that make data interesting and different ways to consider accessibility. How many of us think about checking for color blindness? We do have people in our district that are colorblind. I have to learn about that some more. Your introduction really set the stage. Using that speaker's introduction to set your credentials supported your goal of the speech. I loved that you shared this information. I would love to know exactly, put in the chat, this is where you get this information. These are where those apps are. that would really make us want to go to those places. I challenge you to look at the organization of the speech. What can you do to really hone your message? Is it really data-driven science lessons, or is it animation for learning? When you think about that message, you're going to connect with the audience. Start with a question to draw them in, end with that question to really challenge the audience to learn more. All in all, this was a well done speech, and I would really love to see some more. Thank you so much. Back to you, Grand Inquisitor.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Wow, I'm trying to restrain myself from evaluating the evaluations until the end, but I'm really loving these evaluations. So well done.
Hold yourself back.
So, all right, Joyce, you are evaluating Brandy, I believe.
Yes, I am. Thank you very
Have at
much, James. Thank you very much, fellow Toastmasters, and especially Brandy. Brandy, thank you so much for that presentation. That was fascinating and full of information for all of us. So thank you very much. I'm going to try and evaluate you doing ABC, what you did awesome, what you could do better, and things to challenge you with. First of all, I loved your slides. I love that there weren't so many of them that you couldn't keep track and you had to move quickly through them. You actually had the time to go through and explain it to everybody in clear, and just your words were great. Very good on that. And the pictures were great. The way you started out explaining the dolphin. And yes, I remember that story of the dolphin, of the mother that kept the baby alive, not alive, but with her for 2 weeks. And then the picture of the little baby in the slide, that was great. The slides were perfect and great and caught our attention. So very, very well on that. I also liked the way you spoke. It was very clear. There were pauses at just the right time, which gave us time to think about, oh, yeah, that's what that means. Oh, that's interesting. Instead of rushing through it with so many slides and so many pictures that it didn't really have time to sink in. So thank you very much. Pacing, you went faster, you went slower, and you said, there's a problem with PCDs. And when you said fairly lower, you lowered your voice. When you said clear and loud, your voice went higher. And I thought, that's perfect. That's great. Very good. Very good. Some of the things that I think that you could have done better, even though there were only 6 slides, there was a lot of material on the slides. And I think it was already mentioned earlier that the one slide had a lot of black and white, and there were colors down at the bottom. I think it could have maybe been not quite so much full of material, but it's still, the way you took the time to explain everything, you did a very good job doing that. Another thing about visuals, your glasses kind of reflect the color on the screen. So when I'm looking at your glasses, they're blue. Yeah, and so while it wasn't too annoying, I would remember that if you were giving a presentation in Zoom. Yes, so very good. The other thing that I think you could do better is your favorite word, towards the end, and then at the end, don't apologize. We know from that first slide that who knows, you've got masters and PhDs and who knows what. We know that you're well qualified to tell us about this subject. So don't apologize afterwards. We don't know, we don't care. And with the presentation, it actually makes your presentation stronger if you don't apologize afterwards. We know you know what you're talking about. We could tell by the way you presented things. If there was anything that I could say that you might work on, challenges, the one slide that had the information, maybe too much information, I would work on that, trying to maybe slim it down a little bit. And then at the very end, maybe there would be a call to action. You told us about all these chemicals, what do you want us to do about it? Do you not want us to eat fish? Do you want us to fish? Do you think fishing in the river probably isn't a good thing? I mean, where are we going to use this information that you presented with? I have to say, Brandy, you did a great job. I got the message, chemicals in the waterways. I got that message. I got your slides. I love the pictures. Great job. Great job explaining everything. And the thing that I really, really liked about your presentation is that you mentioned, I really had to think about my audience. Coming to a Toastmaster club, coming to a Nerdmaster meeting club, that makes me feel like you actually took us into consideration when you made your presentation. So thank you very much. Back to you, James.
Thank you so much, Joyce. Yes. All right. So before I approach my victims, I mean, not really. Angela, could you please give the Time Lord report?
Certainly. For timing for speeches, I'm just going down speaker one. It was actually 13 minutes, 38 seconds within time. Eric, your speech was 19 minutes and 8 seconds. It didn't seem that long. Brenda, I'm going to give you the time frames for each individual. So your speech portion was actually 14 minutes and 18 seconds. So you're pretty close. Your pointers were 2:42, and then your Q&A was 2 minutes. For tech moments, Sherry's was 5 minutes, 25 seconds. Robin's was 7 minutes, 1 second. Evaluations were pretty close, 4:32, 4:22, and 4:40.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Angela. And I will note, as part of my general evaluation of the meeting, is that as nerds, we have a hard time shutting up. And so, yes, we tend to go over a lot. As we try and put in margin, we try and put this buffer in there, but it is something that we as a club struggle with and we are working on. However, I'm only going to halfway apologize for it because the content is always so amazing. So anyway, thank you so much for Angela. Maybe we can, do some time dilation in the TARDIS and actually be able to fit 3 hours into 1 hour. And anyway. Next up, we have our Grammificator report from Sandra. Could you please tell us how we did with words?
Thank you so much, pedantic James. Oh, the speakers were all wonderful. And the speakers, Leah, Eric, and Brandy, all used the word of the day, evidence, not once, not twice, but multiple times. Kudos to you on that. I'll acknowledge that straight up. My role tonight is to point out interesting or incorrect usage of grammar. I highlighted some colorful, memorable, and engaging phrases from each of you, as well as a few ways that you might improve your grammar for the next time that would really showcase you as the experts, the professionals, and the knowledgeable speakers of your information that you are, if I may do that. Leah, layering evidence. That's so colorful, I'll never forget it. I loved how you chose your characters of pets, cats, dogs, fish, and hamsters. That painted a picture for me. The data story, taking data apart and weaving it back together. The 3 C's, paradoxically and hypothetical. And oh my, Leah, I love alliteration. Your closing, don't let your data die on the screen. How memorable is that? A few ways that you might improve. Well, Leah, there were a couple uhs and a few gonnas. Going to or will might enhance that a bit more for the next time. Thank you so much. Eric, science education was my sandbox. That was very colorful to me. Science and sandbox, again, alliteration. Multimedia is worth 10,000 words, whereas a picture is worth 1,000 words. I get it. That really explained it to me, Eric. A triad. You use a triad: visualize, synthesize, and analyze. I love it. I'm a sucker for triads as well as iteration. Data driven, as in animation, and your use of the waves. It's colorful. And especially the cacophony of color. Yes. And oh yes, this one makes the eyes work like a ping pong ball.
Yes.
I'll definitely remember that as I work on expressing my own data. Legends and readability. Oh yes, and some of those use all the color on the palette. Again, I'd like to point out some ways to improve. Words that you might want to polish for next time. Gonna, wanna, have to, kinda, ahs, buttas. But overall, you know, all of these speakers tonight, you were just wonderful. I just loved it. This has to be one of my favorite meetings. Maybe I really am a nerd. And Brandy, oh my goodness, the PCBs, biofilms in the Spokane River and bioaccumulation. And there I am, loving to fish and loving to eat what I catch. And I'm wondering about that. So you had me so hooked. Again, heat map. That was a vivid explanation for me where I really honed in. The heat map for the concentration of PCBs. Oh yes, this one, environmental forensics. I get it. Lines of evidence and parsing them apart. Patterns, fingerprints, and finger painting. That was very memorable. Lines of evidence. Oh yes, and moving into bins, that was another one. And your second slide, oh yes, the food chain, and then also your discussion of bioaccumulation. There were, yes, some kindas, wannas, you knows, gunnas, so's, and ahs. And the secret of this is simply becoming aware of it, because once you're aware of it, you'll catch yourself next time and you will remedy that very, very quickly. So not to worry. Oh, Sherry, I loved how you chose your cat as your character for your data, relating that to converting to metrics. And oh my goodness, who wouldn't want to know about Celsius and Fahrenheit for the humorous point of, are you going to travel with a fur coat or a bathing suit? Now that's really important when we go on vacation, isn't it? It's very relatable. And thank you also for sharing your cheat sheet. I thoroughly appreciated that. Kyle, two items for you. Doodly things, loved that. And speakers are known to make up the statistics they quote. Kyle, did you make up 98% of yours? I think if you add a decimal point, then it really adds credibility, and you so had me hooked. I was had. Robin, doodling with Doodly. Thank you for sharing a great and for me, very interesting software for me to file away and a wrinkle in my brain for the next time. There were a few restarts, as in this is, gunnas, wannas, so's, and kindas. Now for the three evaluators, again, those were our favorite errors of grammar. Wannas, gunnas, have tos, and our favorite word all evening was so. That was the #1 favorite word for all through the meeting. And with all of this, I will say it was a memorable meeting. I loved it, and I will turn it back to our Grand Inquisitor, James.
Thank you so much, Sandra. You turned into a wizard along the way too, so that works out great. Thank you so much. I love your evaluations. It is always an honor to have you help contribute to our improvement. I will note in my overall audit of our meeting, one thing I wanted to note is that I was late. I normally am like 45 minutes early opening the meeting, but I was at another meeting that ran late, and then I
got stuck in traffic coming back, and I'm not used to Fargo yet. So, but I was able to pass it off and trust my fellow nerd masters to get everything sorted out, and they did perfectly. So well done, everyone. I want to call attention to something that is really cool about our evaluations. I love how Michael suggested a specific technical way to improve the specific presentation tactic for Leah. Using the PowerPoint presentation as a virtual background would have been ideal for her particular presentation. He called attention to that. And then all of our evaluators gave high quality, high level evaluations with specific actionable advice that's geared for giving technical presentations, which is what this meeting is all about. So well done, all of you. I am so proud of this club, as I always am. I love how we can come here, share highly technical things in a fun, engaging way, and come away learning how to do that better. Because where can we come to do that? That's really hard to learn those kinds of skills. I mean, if you tried to give those kinds of presentations in a lot of normal everyday clubs, they would have a hard time figuring out how to give really effective evaluations. They go, wow, that was cool. I love the squiggly lines and they move, yay. And that'd be about it, right? But this was really powerful, really useful. And that's why I'm the VPM. I can't not make this a sales pitch because I love Nerd Masters. I am proud to be a member. I'm proud to be a founding member. And I love this team, this family. And I would love, I mean, we have a ton of guests here. And I would love each of you to join and be assimilated into the nerd herd. I honestly have not found another club like this. It is really unique. It is really fun. It is really powerful. And it is just so educational. I am improved just by being here. And I always come away high energy. I'm staying up till midnight tonight to be able to be this. I'm over in Fargo, North Dakota in Central Time. So I'm dedicated to this club. I love it. And I love to have you guys join as well. So thank you so much for coming here, sticking it out, and being a part of this family of nerds. And I'll turn it over to our president, Michael Davison, I believe, to close out the meeting.
Well, thank you very much, James. I appreciate that. And you did a great job this evening with your general evaluations. I was wondering if we had any closing comments from our Grand Nerd Master first.
Just talk to our guests, and we had a guest show. Tisha showed up after we got to welcome everybody.
Oh, yes.
Welcome, Tisha, and great meeting.
Glad you could make it.
Absolutely.
Thank you, our guest speakers.
Yes.
Leah
Oh my
and
goodness.
Randy.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
We were honored, and it would not have been the meeting that it was without you being part of it. Thank you so much for coming and presenting, and we hope to hear more from you in the future.
Indeed.
In fact, we all grow by contributing to each other and by blending with each other, learning from each other. It's a fantastic way to do it. And I think this is a great place to do it. You're invited to join us and be our guest whenever you want to, or become one of us. And you'll find out that that's actually a pretty easy thing to do. And it doesn't take too much resources to do it either. We're so glad to have all of you here. We have a little different association each evening. I arrived late too, so I didn't hear all of the introductions. Strangely enough, construction had something and traffic had something to do with my late arrival as well. So I do apologize for that. I think we have some interesting things coming up here. We have some planning for our next meeting. We have a theme of, let's see, the unexplained, I believe, coming up. Kyle, is that correct?
Unexplained mysteries.
I thought it was unsolved mysteries.
Unsolved mysteries.
Yeah,
You're correct. It's unsolved mysteries.
Unsolved mysteries. And I do not know who all the presenters are. I know one of the presenters because I recruited her. She is an actual Bigfoot researcher. She's going to come and talk about her experiences.
I know her as
so
well.
Wants to come talk about Bermuda Triangle or why Pluto is actually a planet, or other things.
So you're saying we have more than just blurry photos of this Bigfoot researcher?
Yes.
We'll see the Bigfoot researcher live.
It is interesting because she has actually gone on to do some notable presentations to some of the groups that do that, and we are honored to have her here. I've been privileged to see her develop her skills. She came to Toastmasters just so she could learn how to present all the things that she'd learned in a coherent manner that her audience could appreciate. Because I'll tell you, there's a lot about Big Beat that are not appreciated. So greatly, I'm really looking forward to her presentation. I would invite you all to come because she has some fascinating things, but we're going to have some other unexplained things out there too. I believe one of the unexplained things may be that our agenda is not yet full, and we will be spending some time on filling that
Yeah,
out.
so our planning meeting will be on the 16th of this month. So if you're a member, jump in. That's the best way to get a slot for speaking, is to attend those meetings and let us know and pitch in for all that. But you can also email us, let us know if you have something you want, a project you want to present or anything like that.
Or if you have an idea
meetings.
for a meeting, like I brought the idea for storytelling with data to our planning meeting.
Come up with a theme or a tiny tech moment. If you got like, ooh, I have a really cool thing I want to share, let us know. We'll plug you in. So we have space.
One of the unusual things that we do as a club here is we actually plan several months in advance of what we're doing. So we have that kind of ability to lay out and prepare and get some of the quality level presentations that we do. We also have, I believe, coming up next month, we're transitioning to some new officers at that time. We're now in the month of June. So we'll have an installation, I believe, as well during that time. So please make sure to come and participate in that as we see the next hands that will guide our club take the reins.
True that. Thank you to all of our officers and our the people who are officers currently jumped in to help out for a partial term to get our club started. And that is really cool. That is an act of service and dedication that is really appreciated. So well done, all of you.
So I see
we're scepters, gavels, and swords. I have my sword.
Unfortunately, your background's blurred, so we can't enjoy all those things.
This is true.
I thank you so much for being here tonight. Are there some events or announcements that we should be knowing about?
I put a couple of events in the chat. I will let the chat speak for itself. We need to get our guests' comments.
We do indeed. So who would like to be our first guest to comment on our meeting this evening? Things they enjoyed, things they might have expected to see and didn't? How would you like to go ahead and address our group? Tisha.
Hi, I actually just put it in the chat. So I love your enthusiasm. What a fun group.
We got plenty of that.
Listen to everybody. I'm pretty new. I joined in February a group, Success Speaks, and I was advised to visit other meetings to watch evaluations. And so that was very informative tonight for me to observe and hear your evaluations and see what fun everybody's having here. So
yeah, fantastic.
Resistance is futile.
We are sure glad you're here with us, and thank you so much. That's great feedback.
Hope to see you come back.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Love to have you back. Zana, I think you had your hand raised.
Well, I had a lot of fun and I learned a lot. So that's kind of cool. That's not something you do in every Toastmaster. The one thing I would have liked to have known ahead of time is how long the speeches were, just because it was different from what I expected. So then I was like, what is going on? Like, just kind of thrown for a loop. It was great, but it did throw me for a loop, especially when you said 4 to 5 minutes for the evaluators. I was like, okay, I'm already lost here. But I also love the enthusiasm, and I love the little mini tech moments. Yeah, the tech moments. That was great because it's kind of like the speeches I'm used to. But that was really nice to have something, that you could take. And then that was cool that you had the guests today because they were awesome. And yeah, those were really, all the speakers were just amazing. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Great feedback. I think we need one of those sound bites that says, and now for something completely different. That takes us
yeah.
John,
we're honest. This is still Toastmasters.
So, yeah, no, it was great to be visiting again. I enjoyed the speeches, just seeing what people did with different data and how they incorporated it into various things was very interesting. I do like tech moments, and I thought the evaluations were all very well done, and I learned something today. So what more can you hope for?
Fantastic.
Thank you.
That's the thing.
Appreciate that.
I will say that is one of the key distinctives that was emergent out of the Nerd Masters culture, is that whenever two Nerd Masters encounter each other, even when it's not in a meeting, each of you come away with something new. It's crazy. John and I were playing Among Us, and we ended up in this random hour-long philosophical conversation. And we came with book recommendations, all kinds of like, we just had a mini Nerd Masters meeting. It just happens as part of our DNA, our blood, is we come away learning something new every time. That's why the Tiny Tech Moments came to be. So yeah, that's part of who we are.
So are you suggesting that we'll have a meeting centered on Among Us coming up? So Leah,
video games.
it's hard to think of you as a guest because you've been with us several times, but what was your feedback for us?
Video games as art would make a great theme.
That would be, actually. I really would love that. That's actually a really cool idea for a topic.
So Leah, do you have any feedback for us?
Well, I wanted to thank you for letting me come as a guest speaker. I was a little nervous. Kyle put me at ease. This is my first time speaking outside of the cocoon of my own little club, other than going to liars contest for some reason.
Oh,
it's
you
easy
rocked
to
it.
tell a lie.
Fantastically done.
I also love the tech moments. I might have Merlin help me convince our home club to do at least some sort of adaptation of it. There aren't a lot of techies in our group. There are a few, but we could do some softer kind of moment.
Hey, and Nerd Masters have been known to do some guest speaking for other clubs as well, if you need to get some
and sometimes dropping in as training too. We've done that as well. Robert's not able to be here tonight, but there was a call out for assistance from a particular club who needed some tech training. And so we asked for volunteers from our task force as a subgroup of Nerd Masters, and he volunteered, and we sent him off, and he gave a presentation to help train Zoom training. So that's part of the services that we offer to the district, is actually helping out with training like that. So it's just super cool. I gotta give him a high five there, so he's not here.
All right. So any other feedback or announcements before we call it an evening?
I was going to announce.
I think we're looking
Club
pretty
officer
good.
training.
Oh, yes, we do. We do. Thank you. Do you have a little bit of information on that to share with us?
I put it in the chat.
You did.
It is on the D32 website.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, there are 3 sessions offered through District 32.
Mm-hmm.
If you cannot make any of those, feel free to check out other districts.
Yep, totally.
All right.
One other final announcement. Unfortunately, this is a bit late. We missed one of them because Ruth was here earlier. But our 2 newest members of the Nerd Herd are Ruth and Angela, who's still here. So everybody say hi to Angela. She's our newest member.
Yay! Yes.
It's great to have you, Angela.
It is. Thank you so
Wonderful
much. You
being
handled
here.
that stopwatch fantastically.
Yes. Well done.
I didn't even see the hands. I didn't even see you press the thing on there. And just like that, the colors started showing up. It's amazing.
Oh, brother.
Sleight of hand.
And to our guests, we would like you to join our Nerd Herd.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Would love to have
I will be
them.
sending out emails to follow up with you and kind of converse with you further. And I will be including a membership application form. So just saying.
And I believe we also collected a little feedback on the way out. If you go back and
there should be a
look
link
at-
in your email with a Google form where you can give us feedback and insights on what you thought and some other questions and so on.
So you can help us have better meetings. We appreciate that.
Always improving. Excelsior.
Well, thank you one and all this evening. It's so good to have each of you here. I so look forward to this every month. And we'll see some of you during this coming month during the trainings as we come in and we assist with those, the technical side in most cases. But some of us will also be trainers, I believe, as well.
Yeah.
So
many of us, and a lot of us will be Zoom masters too. Zoom
we will be indeed. Behind the scenes, don't pay attention to the person
keeping the
behind the
district
curtain.
ticking.
Yes. All right. All right. Well, a good evening to one and all, and we'll see you on the 16th for planning, and then we'll see you next month, which I believe is like I want to say the 6th, but maybe 7th, I think.
7th. The
It is the
7th.
7th, yes.
July 7th.
July 7th. So
Good night, everyone.
same nerd time, same nerd
Night,
channel.
Eric.
Take care. Have a great evening.
Well.
Bye-bye.